may be seated. I'm not going to ask y'all to crowd over and come through all these kids, but I just want to say something to the kids. These are all my grandkids. Yeah. So, what is this? A star. Yeah, you can speak up. This is the one moment when you get to talk loud in church. It's a star, right? Where do we see stars? In the sky, yes. At night, we see stars in the sky. They help us find our way. Sailors use the stars to help them know where to sail, know which direction they're going in and where they're going. Stars help us find our way. So in today's Bible story that I just read when I was standing here, some wise men saw a special star. They knew it meant that something really amazing had happened, that a king had been born. Do you know who that king was that had been born? It was Jesus. It was Jesus. And the wise men knew that a very important king had been born, and they were following the star. They didn't know exactly where this king was, but they trusted the star to show them the way. They had to travel a long way, but they did not give up. When they finally found Jesus, they were overjoyed because they knew that they had found the king that they had been looking for a long time. And they knelt down and they worshiped him. And then they gave him gifts. What were the gifts? They gave him gifts of gold and myrrh and frankincense. That's right. Not because Jesus needed presents, but because they wanted to honor him. So this story reminds us of three important things. One, God guides us, just like the star guided the wise men. God guides us. The other thing is that Jesus is the king worth worshiping. And the third thing is that listening to God helps keep us on the right path. So this star reminds us that Jesus is the light of the world. And that if we follow Jesus, if we say our prayers and read our Bible, and when we are loving to each other, then we are like Jesus and we can be the light of the world. We can follow Jesus faithfully just like those wise men followed the star. Would you like to have it? So that'll just remind you. The star of your life is Jesus. All right. This gospel reading is the same reading that we read on the Feast of the Epiphany, which is just in a couple of days. It's on Tuesday this week. And a major theme in Christmas and Epiphany is that of appearing. It's the theme of showing up. And that's what Epiphany means. It means appearing. Specifically, it means the appearing of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, who were represented by the Magi, or the wise men, from the east. And so for the next several weeks here in church, we're going to be reading gospel stories about the many ways that Jesus appears or shows up or manifests God to the people that he meets. So we're leaving Christmas behind. We have a couple more days of Christmas. But as we leave Christmas behind for another year and we step into a new year, I invite you to think about the ways that Jesus appears or shows up or manifests God in your life. I think we experience these epiphanies more often than we realize. But as our epistle reading says today, when the eyes of our hearts are enlightened, we do experience God more fully. and we are more aware of the many ways that God shows up for us. I've always loved this story of the three wise men, especially the Christmas pageant versions, where the wise men are dressed in their dad's bathrobes and they're bearing gifts in cigar boxes that have been spray painted gold and bejeweled with various forms of pasta and old costume jewelry. And if we were lucky, the gold in those boxes was maybe those gold chocolate coins that we see at Christmas. But the Christmas pageant version, as delightful as it is and as effective as it is in burning the story into our memories, leaves out a lot. The focus on these exotic kings riding in on camels, as we see up here, might make you think that this story is about their appearing. Important as the wise men are, they are not the main character of this story. They introduce us to the main character. We are told that the Magi, or the wise men, came from the east. That's all it says, from the east. This could have been anywhere east of Israel. It could have been Syria, Persia, or Babylon, or Mesopotamia, or even further away. But they weren't actually kings. They were sages. They were astronomers, astrologers. They were advisors, royal advisors, who watched the heavens for signs of the birth of great kings. I'm sure they did other things, but that was one of the things that they did, was they watched the heavens for signs of the birth of a great king. These wise men in our story from Matthew's Gospel observed a particular celestial phenomenon appearing in the western sky, which led them to believe that a great king had been born somewhere over in that direction. And so they set out to search for this great king. Scholars have tried to link a particular cosmic event to this appearing. But the point is that God initiated his plan to reveal himself through Jesus to the Gentiles using the things that were familiar to them, the stars in the sky. God knew that they would be looking to the sky for signs, and God gave them a sign in the sky to draw them to Jesus. And so the star also points to the main character of this story. Last week we read how Jesus was born to impoverished parents in an obscure village under harsh conditions. His birth was announced to shepherds, also poor and uneducated and living on the margins. God's grand design was brought into being in really humble surroundings. But today, we meet a band of wealthy foreign royal advisors who arrived in the big city of Jerusalem and met up with the wealthy and powerful King Herod, who was king over all Judea, and his scholarly advisors. The Magi arrived in Jerusalem because, isn't it logical that a king would be born in an important city like Jerusalem? And they asked around, where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? We have come to pay him homage. And that phrase, pay him homage, carries with it the visual of laying prostrate before a great king. We have come to pay him homage. When King Herod got wind of their arrival, and more specifically, more importantly, their question about another king of the Jews, Herod was frightened, and understandably so. Herod was not a rightful king by birth. He was an installed king, installed by the Roman emperor. He was very much resented by his people because he wasn't really a Jew. and he was a cruel man. His aim was to remain king of the Jews for the rest of his life, and he went to great lengths to make sure that that happened. And so he was threatened, very much threatened, by this question from foreigners: where is this child born king of the Jews? Herod calls together his advisors, his chief priests, and his scribes to find out from them where the Christ, or the Messiah, was to be born. Chief priests and scribes did not look to the heavens for a sign that a king had been born. They looked to the prophecies of their scriptures. And the prophet Micah had said, "Of Bethlehem, from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." So then Herod, a very insecure man, secretly called for the wise men, told them, "Go to Bethlehem, find out where the child is, and then return to me so that I too can return and pay him homage." He said he did not send his own advisors to Bethlehem, probably because he was fearful that they might find this other king that would threaten his own power and rule. Herod had no intention of paying homage to anyone, certainly not another king. When the wise men first began to follow the star, maybe up to like 2 years before, they were looking for a king. They did not know where they were going or what kind of a king they would find. They just followed that star, believing that it would lead them to a great king. When the star led them into Judea, they assumed they were looking for the king of the Jews, because every nation had its own king. And they assumed that king would be in Jerusalem. When they got to Bethlehem, the wise men were overjoyed when they found not only what they were searching for, but so much more. For there was God appearing, showing up in the child Jesus. And they paid him homage. They knew that God had led them to a real marvel. And they paid him homage as king, maybe not fully realizing that this king had come for all people of every nation, of which they were the first. This king has come for you and for me. They came prepared with gifts for a king, as I said, not because Jesus needed gifts, but to honor him with gold that was precious, with frankincense that signified divinity, with myrrh, a spice used in burial. Gifts royal and prophetic, for Jesus is King and God and sacrifice, not just for his own people, but for all people, for all time, you and me. The wise men from the east bowed down and worshiped Jesus. The wise men of Judea would scoff and eventually have Jesus killed. King Herod ruled by cruelty and murder. King Jesus would triumph by dying for the sins of the whole world. There will always be those who resist the kingship of Jesus. And sometimes that resistance comes from insiders. And we in the church who have ears to hear should listen up. We cannot assume that because we bear the name Christian, we have a corner on the complete truth. Jeremiah chapter 29 says, "You will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart." God is not impressed by intellect or lip service, but God will respond to sincere investigation like that of the wise men, the seeking out and pondering the question, what is God up to? What is God up to, and what does it mean for us and for the world? What is God doing? We live in a time of great spiritual diversity. More and more people are declaring themselves spiritual but not religious. People are pulling together fragments of spiritual practices from many traditions into conflations of what works for me. There is a longing and a hunger for meaning, a desire to know truth and to be connected with the divine, just as there was in the time of the wise men. People in their search for God begin in all kinds of places, all points of the compass, in all the realms of the world. And God uses a wide range of things to create in us a longing for Him and a way for us to find Him. A death or a birth, a great sorrow or a great joy, a sign in the sky or a sound on the wind, a dream or a vision. Ultimately, it was the scriptures that led the wise men to Jesus. They got close, supposing that a king would be found in a palace in the capital city, but the scriptures led them to Bethlehem. And as they drew closer to the child Jesus, the star stopped right over the place where he was. And the wise men were overjoyed. At last they had found what they were looking for. All of their seeking and searching was rewarded when at last they were in the presence of Jesus. We are all invited to Bethlehem to see, to believe, to pay homage, and to offer ourselves to Jesus. As we enter this season of Epiphany this week, we celebrate God with us in the person of Jesus. I hope we will look for ways to see the light of Christ in the world around us and to be the light of Christ wherever we go. As you begin a new year, may God give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation, that with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you may know what is the hope to which He has called you. What are the riches of God's glorious inheritance? And what is the immeasurable greatness of God's power for all who believe? Happy New Year.